More than 200 years ago, Americans fought a revolution against big government.
He has erected a multitude of new offices and has sent hither swarms of officials to harass our people and eat out their substance.
George III and his bureaucrats taxed and controlled their lives until the people said, enough.
On Second Thought, where William Wagener gives you information that ought to give you second thoughts on the unconstitutional acts of our local, state, and federal government. I'm Megan Wells. Now, producer and host of On Second Thought, the good guy in the white hat, William Wagener.
Well, thank you, Megan, for that introduction. I'm William Wagener, the guy taking off the white hat. I hope you've had a good week, safe from the IRS, because as you know, Irwin Schiff, William Benson, and many others have proved nobody has to pay federal income taxes if you read and follow instructions on Irwin Schiff's The Federal Mafia. This show is about your liberties, the Constitution, and taking back America. I can think of few men that tower as high as Irwin Schiff does. Irwin Schiff wrote The Federal Mafia. This book, by the way, was banned by a federal judge in Las Vegas. And the way they banned the book was to haul off all the copies out of Irwin Schiff's bookstore in Las Vegas. They just confiscated all the copies of The Federal Mafia. Then they had a temporary injunction to prevent him from selling the book. Now, I've heard of courts saying you can't sell the book Fanny Hill, for example, was once banned because it was suggestive and pornographic reading. And I've heard of books being banned that advocate the violent overthrow of your government. But this is the first time I've ever seen a book banned. And the book I'm talking about is The Federal Mafia. Banned because it tells you how you can legally follow certain steps and stop paying the IRS. And unless you work for the federal government or you're a dealer in guns, munitions, or alcohol, unless you fall into one of those categories, you don't have to pay the IRS, according to Irwin Schiff. And we're going to have an interview with him coming up. For those of you that wonder what this show is about, it's about restoring your liberties, taking back America. And one of the ways I recommend you do that is to get yourself knowledgeable. Get The Great Libertarian Offer by Harry Browne. He was the Libertarian presidential candidate in 2000 AD. A great book, and you'll find out that the libertarians are standing up for what America used to be about: liberty and freedom. Your freedom to keep your own money. Think of how much more money you would have if you never had to worry about April 15th. If it was just another day and not the day that you get some of the money the government's stealing from you all year long. By the way, speaking of money, have you seen the new truthnow.com note here? It's the 9/11 note. I'm not sure if that means $900.11 or what, but it reads across the top, fraudulent event note. The United States of aggression. No blood for oil in red. And this is a strong resemblance of a certain president that thinks he's president and habitates in the White House. Over here it says New World Order and the Office of Nostalgic Influence. Over here it supposedly has a signature of John D. Rockefeller. On the back of this new note, if you haven't seen this new funny money, there you see the familiar all-seeing eye and the pyramid. But up here it reads, The War on Freedom. And it looks pretty close. And down below it says, One Deception. I mean, this guy's got it right. And you can go to COP versus CIA.com or truth.now and maybe get your own. Just thought I'd share that with you people. I'll give you the end. We didn't get to finish that tape on the sex slave ring operated to the benefit of politicians. Child sex slave rings. Before I go that, I just want to give you a little brief here. Offshore companies make $18 billion, $1 to $18 billion with U.S. This is an AP story. Companies that reduced their U.S. tax bill by incorporating overseas did $1 billion worth of business with the federal government last year. An Associated Press computer analysis of federal contracts showed. The Bermuda-based consulting company Accenture Limited, a spin-off of the former Big Five accounting firm Arthur Andersen, where have you heard that name before, was the biggest federal customer. And this coming year, there will be $18 billion more by offshore companies. Thank you, Democrats. Thank you, Republicans. Now, to a Los Angeles Times editorial. I want to mention, justice has taken a beating, a really severe beating. This comes from the issue on Wednesday, May 28th, 2003. The Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas labored, he labored, to justify the bullying interrogation of a farm worker who was shot by an Oxford police officer, was gravely wounded. Justice John Paul Stevens, dissenting, called the inquisition that was, quote, the functional equivalent of torture. Thomas, in a 63 majority opinion Tuesday, rolls back decades of constitutional protections against self-incrimination and all but invites backroom roughing-them-up police tactics of old. I'm reading the LA Times article. The farm worker, Oliverio Martinez, is legally blind and partly paralyzed from 5 bullets that the police pumped into his body after they stopped him in connection with an investigation of possible drug sales in the Oxnard neighborhood. Although Martinez initially complied with the orders to dismount his bicycle, not like he was going to escape them,
that ought to give you second thoughts on the unconstitutional acts of our local, state, and federal government.
A scuffle resulted when the officers discovered he was carrying a knife, which he used to work in the fields with. They shot him. Paramedics arrived and carted Mr. Martinez, bleeding and screaming, to a hospital. For nearly an hour, Martinez waited for medical treatment, and then, as the doctors tended him, the officers pressured him to confess to starting the fight, in which the officers pumped 5 bullets into him. "I'm dying!" Martinez cried. "Okay, yes, you're dying," the officer said, "but tell me why you are fighting with the police." Excuse me? Something wrong with these police down there in Oxnard? Not once did the police officers inform Martinez of his right to remain silent, and to have a lawyer present. Instead, they tried to badger him into a confession. They took advantage of his physical agony and mental anguish and the fact that he couldn't move from the hospital bed. In the end, the officers got nothing useful. Well, to go on, Justice Thomas, that wonderful black Supreme Court justice, basically said, you know, it's okay. Go ahead. You can do this. And thank goodness for Justice Stevens and the dissenters that said this isn't right. This just isn't right.